Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! As the week strolled by, Tuesday brought an unexpected disruption to Edgar Wheeler's serene routine. Amidst his culinary endeavor in the kitchen, the phone's shrill ring pierced the air. Juggling the spatula in one hand, he hastily answered, his shoulder bearing the device. "A cry for help, Edgar! An urgent plea!" Aunt Lynn's distressed voice echoed through the line. "All my efforts! In disarray!" Intrigued but concerned, Edgar promptly reduced the stove's flame, his culinary creation momentarily neglected. "What's the crisis, dear aunt?" The explanation poured forth. A grand plan. An expansion of the salon. A new product line meticulously curated with luxury makeup and professional apparel. But a snag marred this venture. Edgar already suspected the answer, but hoped he was wrong. "Because you're my favorite nephew, who's exactly the right size and has a flexible work-from-home schedule," she replied sweetly, her tone shifting to one of calculated charm. "You want me to wear women's clothes and makeup," Edgar stated flatly, running a hand through his short brown hair. The idea seemed absurd. He'd never worn anything remotely feminine in his 30 years of life. "Just during working hours, for a fair wage. Think of it as being a product tester. No one even needs to see you. You can come to the salon before opening hours for fitting an application, then go about your day. I just need honest feedback on how the products hold up." Edgar started to refuse, but hesitated. His aunt had always been there for him, especially after his parents' divorce when he was 12. Her salon had been his safe haven many afternoons. He remembered sitting in the back room doing homework while she worked, how she'd slipped him extra allowance money when times were tight for his mom. "How long would this testing period last?" he asked reluctantly. "Just a month or so. Please, Edgar, I wouldn't ask if I weren't desperate." The pasta was now definitely overcooked. Edgar sighed, staring at his reflection in the kitchen window. Average height, somewhat athletic build from occasional running, nothing remarkable except perhaps his unusually long eyelashes that had earned him teasing in high school. "Fine," he finally said. "But no one can know about this. And I'm serious, Aunt Lynn. No photos, no clients seeing me. Nothing." Her squeal of delight made him wince and instantly regret his decision. "You're a lifesaver. Come by tomorrow at 7, before anyone else arrives. We'll get you all set up." As he hung up, Edgar dumped his ruined pasta into the sink and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The salon smelled of expensive shampoo and subtle floral scents when Edgar arrived the next morning. He'd barely slept, alternating between convincing himself this was just a favor for family and wondering if he'd lost his mind. "Right on time," Aunt Lynn chirped, ushering him inside and locking the door behind him. Her salon, Transformations, was upscale and tasteful, with sleek styling chairs and warm lighting. Currently empty, it would fill with clients in about 2 hours. "I'm still not sure about this," Edgar said, clutching his coffee thermos like a lifeline. "Nonsense. It's just product testing. People do it all the time." She guided him to her private styling room in the back, where she typically handled her VIP clients. "Besides, you can work from home most days. You just need to wear the products during normal business hours and take notes on comfort, longevity, that sort of thing." The styling room had already been prepared. On the counter lay an intimidating array of makeup products, and hanging on a rack were several professional women's outfits. "First, we need to establish your baseline look," Aunt Lynn said professionally, gesturing for him to sit in the styling chair. "The whole point is consistency for the testing." Edgar lowered himself into the chair, already feeling out of place. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means we need to decide on your makeup style and color palette. Then we'll stick with variations of that for the testing period. Same with clothing. We need to know what sizes work for you." For the next hour, Edgar sat uncomfortably as his aunt transformed his face with careful application of foundation, concealer, eyeshadow, mascara, and other products he couldn't name. He kept his eyes closed most of the time, partly at her instruction and partly because he wasn't sure he wanted to see the transformation in progress. "You have fantastic bone structure," she commented. "And your eyelashes. Women pay good money for lashes like these." "Great," Edgar muttered. "My one feminine quality." "Hold still." She applied something to his lips. "And actually, you have several features that work well for this. Smooth skin, naturally arched eyebrows." When she finally spun him around to face the mirror, Edgar nearly choked on his coffee. The person staring back at him was not him. At least, not the him he recognized. His features had been subtly enhanced rather than dramatically changed, but the effect was startling. His eyes looked larger, his cheekbones more defined, and his lips fuller. "This is a natural day look," Aunt Lynn explained. "Professional enough for an office environment, but not overdone. We'll try more dramatic styles later in the testing." Edgar couldn't stop staring. The most disconcerting part wasn't how different he looked. It was how he didn't look ridiculous. He'd expected to appear clownish or obviously like a man in makeup, but instead, the face looking back at him was pretty. "Now for hair," she continued, seemingly oblivious to his shock. "Hair? What's wrong with my hair?" Edgar touched his short brown locks protectively. "Nothing's wrong with it, but we need to complete the look. I've ordered some high-quality wigs, but for today, we'll just style what you have." She reached for a styling product. "You've let it grow out a bit on top. We can work with that." 20 minutes later, his hair had been artfully styled into something that looked deliberately tousled rather than just messy. With the makeup, the effect was even more convincing. "Now for clothing," Aunt Lynn announced, turning to the rack. "We'll start with something conservative and professional." She handed him a crisp white blouse, a gray knee-length skirt, flesh-toned pantyhose, and a pair of modest black heels. "You can't be serious," Edgar protested, holding the skirt like it might bite him. "Completely serious. The changing room is right there." She pointed to a small adjoining bathroom. "Everything should fit, but let me know if there are any issues." Alone in the changing room, Edgar stared at himself in the mirror for a long moment. The face looking back was both familiar and foreign. He touched his cheek hesitantly, feeling the smooth texture of the foundation. This was ridiculous, he thought. Absolutely ridiculous. And yet, as he slowly changed into the outfit, there was something fascinating about the transformation. The blouse buttoned differently than his shirts, the material softer against his skin. The skirt felt strange, the absence of fabric between his legs disconcerting. The pantyhose were a struggle, but he eventually managed to pull them on without tearing them. The heels, thankfully, were only about 2 inches high, but still required careful balance. When he emerged from the changing room, Aunt Lynn clasped her hands together in delight. "Perfect! You look absolutely professional. How does everything feel?" Edgar shifted uncomfortably. "Weird. The pantyhose are tight, and I feel like I'm going to fall over in these shoes." "You'll get used to the heels. Most women do. She circled him, making small adjustments to his outfit. The important thing is to note how the clothing feels throughout the day. Does the waistband dig in? Does the blouse bunch up when you sit? That kind of thing. She handed him a small notebook. Record your observations here. And remember, you're testing for comfort and durability. Be honest. That's what I need. Edgar nodded numbly, still trying to reconcile the image in the full-length mirror with his self-perception. The person reflected there could easily pass for a woman in an office environment. A conservatively dressed businesswoman with auburn hair, styled in a fashionable bob. I have your first week's outfits prepared, Aunt Lynn continued, indicating several garment bags hanging nearby. Each is labeled for the day. Come back tomorrow morning and we'll do your makeup again. We'll be testing different foundations to see which lasts the best throughout a workday. As Edgar left the salon through the back door, carefully walking in the unfamiliar heels, he felt exposed despite the early hour and relative emptiness of the streets. He quickly made his way to his car, slipped inside, and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. This was just a temporary arrangement, he reminded himself. A favor for his aunt. Product testing. Nothing more. But as he adjusted his rearview mirror and caught sight of his transformed face, something unexpected fluttered in his chest. A feeling he couldn't quite name, but that wasn't entirely unpleasant. By the end of the first week, Edgar had developed a routine. He arrived at the salon early each morning, submitted to Aunt Lynn's increasingly efficient makeup application, changed into that day's designated outfit, and returned to his apartment to work. As a freelance software developer, he could work from home most days, interacting with clients exclusively via email and the occasional phone call. The skirts became less strange, the heels less precarious. He had dutifully recorded his observations in the notebook. Pantyhose began to itch after 4 hours. Pencil skirt restricts movement when climbing stairs. Nude lipstick faded completely after lunch. What he didn't write down were the other observations. How he'd begun to enjoy the morning ritual of transformation. How he'd found himself practicing walking more gracefully in the heels when no one was watching. How he'd started to appreciate the way certain colors brought out the green in his hazel eyes. On Monday of the second week, Aunt Lynn presented him with a new challenge. Today we're testing a different product category, she announced as he settled into the styling chair. Longer wearing makeup formulations and a new line of business casual attire. The makeup she applied felt heavier, especially around his eyes. When she finished and turned him toward the mirror, Edgar was startled by the smoky eyeshadow and deeper rose lipstick. This is professional? He questioned, raising an eyebrow at his reflection. Business casual, Aunt Lynn corrected. Appropriate for creative workplaces or casual Fridays. The eyeshadow is supposed to be smudge-proof for 12 hours, and the lipstick claims to be kiss-proof. Edgar felt his cheeks warm. I'm not planning on testing that particular claim. Figure of speech, she laughed. Now for today's outfit. The business casual look consisted of a patterned tunic in shades of blue and green over black leggings, paired with ankle boots that were surprisingly comfortable. The overall effect was stylish but less formal than previous outfits. As the days passed, Edgar found himself becoming more immersed in the experience. He began experimenting with small gestures and mannerisms that matched his feminine appearance, crossing his legs when seated, using more expressive hand movements when speaking, allowing his voice to settle into a slightly higher register. These changes weren't conscious decisions at first, more like adaptations to his new presentation. But increasingly, they felt natural, even right somehow. When alone in his apartment, he no longer rushed to remove the makeup or change out of the feminine clothing as soon as the workday ended. Sometimes he would remain dressed well into the evening, telling himself it was for the thoroughness of the testing, but knowing there was more to it than that. By the third week, Aunt Lynn had introduced him to a variety of styles, from conservative business attire to more casual weekend wear. She'd shown him how to touch up his makeup and had even begun teaching him basic application techniques in case you need to refresh during the day, though they both knew he was becoming increasingly interested in the process itself. "You know," she said one morning as she applied a winged eyeliner to his lids, "you've taken to this with surprising ease." Edgar kept his eyes closed as instructed, but felt a flutter of anxiety at her observation. "It's just good acting," he replied, trying to sound casual. "Getting into character for the testing." Aunt Lynn made a non-committal humming sound, but didn't press the issue. That evening, alone in his apartment, Edgar stood before his bathroom mirror, studying his reflection. The makeup had lasted remarkably well throughout the day, the foundation still smooth, the eyeshadow barely creased. He was wearing a burgundy wrap dress that draped flatteringly across his chest and cinched at his waist, creating the illusion of curves where there were none. Something had been building inside him over these weeks, a realization that hovered at the edges of his consciousness, too intimidating to examine directly. But tonight, with no one watching, he allowed himself to really look. "Hello," he whispered to his reflection, his voice soft in the quiet bathroom. "Who are you, really?" The person in the mirror looked back, auburn hair framing a face that seemed increasingly familiar and right. The word came to him unbidden, rising from some deep place he'd never fully acknowledged. Her. The person in the mirror was her. The thought should have been shocking, disturbing even. Instead, it settled over him like a warm blanket, comforting in its rightness. Tears welled in his eyes, threatening to ruin the mascara Aunt Lynn had so carefully applied that morning. Edgar reached for his phone, hands trembling slightly as he dialed his aunt's number. "Can we talk?" he asked when she answered. "Not about the products, about me." "I've always known there was something," Edgar explained, sitting across from Aunt Lynn in her living room later that evening. He was still wearing the burgundy wrap dress, had even refreshed his lipstick before coming over. "Something that didn't quite fit. I just never had the words for it, or maybe I was afraid to find them." Aunt Lynn reached across the coffee table and squeezed his hand. "I suspected, you know. Not at first, but these past weeks, watching you, there's been a kind of blossoming. Like you were finally allowing yourself to be seen." "I think I'm transgender," Edgar said, the words both terrifying and liberating to speak aloud. "I think I'm a woman." Saying it released something that had been tightly wound inside him for years, perhaps his entire life. Memories surfaced, his discomfort in male social groups, his inexplicable envy when watching women select clothing or apply makeup, the sense of disconnection from his own reflection. "What do you want to do?" Aunt Lynn asked gently. "I don't know," Edgar admitted. "This all feels so sudden, but also like I've been walking toward it my whole life without realizing." "There's no rush," she assured him, "but if you want to explore this further, I'm here." That night marked the beginning of a journey. Edgar continued the product testing, but it transformed from an obligation into an opportunity for exploration. He began researching gender identity, reading accounts from other transgender women, and cautiously reaching out to online support communities. 2 months later, well beyond the original testing period, Edgar sat in Aunt Lynn's styling chair again, but this time for a different purpose.
"I've chosen a name,"
he announced as she trimmed his now longer auburn hair, which he'd been growing out. "Lucille, after Grandma Lucy." Aunt Lynn smiled, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Lucille, it suits you." "I've also made an appointment with a gender therapist," he continued, "and I'm looking into hormones. I know it's a big step, but it feels right." "I'm proud of you," Aunt Lynn said, laying down her scissors to squeeze his shoulders. "Living authentically takes courage." The transformation continued, not just physical, but internal. Edgar began introducing himself as Lucille to new acquaintances, then eventually to friends. Some were confused, a few uncomfortable, but most were supportive, especially once they saw how much happier and more confident she became. Hormone therapy brought subtle changes: softer skin, slight breast development, a redistribution of body fat that further feminized her appearance. The makeup routines Aunt Lynn had taught her became a joyful part of daily life rather than an experiment. Choosing outfits, a bright red swing dress became a particular favorite, was no longer about testing comfort, but about expressing her true self. 6 months after that fateful phone call, Lucille stood before the mirror in her bedroom, dressed for her first day at a new job. She'd decided to make a fresh start professionally as well, joining a progressive tech company that valued diversity. Her auburn hair now fell past her shoulders, styled in loose waves. She wore a forest green blouse, tucked into tailored black pants, with delicate gold jewelry and the comfortable heels she'd discovered during the testing period. Her phone chimed with a text from Aunt Lynn. "Good luck today! You're going to be amazing!" Lucille smiled at her reflection, at the person she'd always been but had only recently discovered. The journey wasn't over. Transitions rarely had neat endpoints, but she was finally moving forward as her authentic self. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to Aunt Lynn, to herself, or to the universe that had provided such an unexpected path to self-discovery, she wasn't entirely sure. "So, that's how my salon accidentally catalyzed your awakening." Aunt Lynn laughed, raising her champagne glass in a toast. Who knew product testing could be so life-changing? It was the first anniversary of Lucille's transition, and they were celebrating with dinner at Lucille's apartment. The place looked different now. She'd redecorated to reflect her personality, with colorful throw pillows and framed vintage fashion prints on the walls. "I certainly didn't expect it," Lucille agreed, clinking her glass against her aunt's. She was wearing the bright red swing dress that had become her signature piece, paired with comfortable black flats. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup subtle but skillfully applied. "I sometimes wonder how long it would have taken me to figure things out if you hadn't called that day." "You'd have gotten there eventually," Aunt Lynn said confidently. "Truth has a way of surfacing." After dinner, they settled on the couch with coffee. Lucille had become more comfortable in her skin over the past year. Her movements and expressions no longer studied, but natural. The hormones had continued their subtle work, softening her features and redistributing her body's shape. More importantly, the inner sense of rightness had only grown stronger with time. "I've been thinking about the salon," Lucille said, curling her legs beneath her on the couch. "About how transformative that experience was for me. Not just the physical aspects, but having a safe space to explore identity." "It's what transformations was always meant to be," Aunt Lynn nodded. "Though I admit, I never anticipated quite such a profound result."
"What would you think about expanding that concept?"
Lucille leaned forward, excitement brightening her expression. creating a dedicated service for people questioning their gender or wanting to explore presentation options. Not just transgender individuals, but anyone interested in playing with gender expression in a supportive environment. Aunt Lynn tilted her head thoughtfully. Like a specialized consultation service? That could work. We already have the private styling room. Exactly. We could offer more than just makeovers. Education about makeup application, wardrobe consultation, voice coaching referrals, a comprehensive approach. We? Aunt Lynn raised an eyebrow. Lucille smiled shyly. I've been thinking about making a career change. Software development pays the bills, but it doesn't fulfill me the way it once did. This past year has shown me how powerful personal transformation can be, and I'd love to help others on that journey. Are you proposing a partnership? Aunt Lynn asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. I am. I have savings to invest, and skills that could complement yours. Plus, who better to guide others through gender exploration than someone who's walked that path? They talked long into the evening, sketching plans and sharing ideas. By the time Aunt Lynn left, they had the outline of a new business venture, a specialized service within transformations dedicated to gender exploration in a safe, supportive environment. As Lucille cleared the dinner dishes, she paused to look at her reflection in the window above the sink. The auburn-haired woman who gazed back was someone she now recognized completely, someone who had always been there waiting to be acknowledged. She thought about the journey ahead, not just her own continuing evolution, but the opportunity to guide others as they discovered their true selves. Life had taken an unexpected turn that day when the phone rang, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. The expansion of transformations launched 6 months later, after careful planning and preparation. True Self-Services occupied the private styling room and an additional space they'd leased next door, decorated to be welcoming and discreet. Lucille had completed training in gender-affirming care and counseling to complement her personal experience. Their first client was a nervous 35-year-old named Ryan, who'd been questioning his gender identity for years, but had never had a safe space to explore. Lucille recognized the anxiety in his eyes, the same she'd felt sitting in that styling chair for the first time. Let's start by talking about what you're hoping to experience today, she said, gesturing for him to take a seat in the comfortable consultation area.
I don't even know,
Ryan admitted, twisting his hands in his lap.
I've always felt different, out of place in my own skin. I've tried on my wife's clothes when she's not home, but that feels secretive and wrong. She knows I'm here, by the way, he added quickly. This was her idea, actually.
That's wonderful that you have her support, Lucille said, warmly. And what you're feeling is completely normal. Gender exploration can be confusing, but it's also an opportunity to discover parts of yourself that may have been hidden. As she guided Ryan through the consultation process, Lucille felt a profound sense of purpose. She explained the services they offered, from simple makeup application to complete transformations, always emphasizing that exploration didn't necessarily mean transition. Many clients simply wanted to understand aspects of themselves better. When Ryan eventually sat in the styling chair, his eyes closed as Aunt Lynn worked her magic with foundation and contouring, Lucille saw herself in him, the uncertainty, the hope, the possibility of revelation. By the end of the session, the person who looked in the mirror wasn't Ryan, but Rachel, a name he'd chosen for exploration purposes, with softly styled hair, subtle makeup, and a burgundy wrap dress, not unlike the one Lucille had worn on her own night of realization. I feel... Rachel, began, then paused, eyes wide with wonder. I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time, That's how it begins, Lucille said gently, standing beside her. With recognition. True self-services flourished, drawing clients from across the state and eventually beyond. Lucille and Aunt Lynn expanded their offerings to include regular support groups, specialized workshops, and even weekend retreats focused on gender exploration and expression. They hired additional staff, including a voice coach and a wardrobe consultant who specialized in gender-affirming clothing. 3 years after her own transition began, Lucille found herself addressing a room full of beauty industry professionals at a regional conference, sharing the story of transformation's innovative approach and the importance of creating safe spaces for gender exploration. The beauty industry has always been about transformation, she told the audience, standing confidently in a tailored emerald green dress that complemented her auburn hair. But too often, we've defined beauty narrowly, reinforcing rather than questioning gender norms. What we've discovered is that by creating spaces where people can safely explore their gender expression, we're not just offering a service, we're sometimes offering a lifeline. The reception to her talk was overwhelmingly positive, with several salon owners approaching afterward to ask about implementing similar services. Lucille handed out business cards and promised consultation support, her heart full at the thought of the ripple effect their work might have. That evening, back in her apartment, Lucille video-called her mother, who had eventually come around to supporting her daughter's transition after some initial difficulty. "The presentation went well?" her mother asked, her face slightly pixelated on the screen. "Better than expected," Lucille confirmed, still wearing the emerald dress, but having kicked off her heels in favor of comfortable slippers. "I think we might be starting a movement in the industry." "I'm proud of you," her mother said, the words still new enough between them to bring a sheen of tears to Lucille's eyes. "You found your purpose." After ending the call, Lucille stood before her bedroom mirror, taking in her reflection. The journey from Edgar to Lucille had not always been smooth. There had been difficult conversations, lost friendships, moments of doubt and fear. But there had also been profound joy, deeper connections, and a sense of alignment that made every challenge worthwhile. She thought about Ryan/Rachel, who was now in the early stages of their own transition journey, about all the clients who had come through the doors of True Self, each with their own unique relationship to gender. Some had discovered, as she had, that they were transgender. Others had found they were comfortable with their assigned gender, but enjoyed exploring different expressions of it. Still others had realized they existed somewhere in the non-binary spectrum. What united them all was the opportunity to explore without judgment, to try on different aspects of themselves in a supportive environment. And at the center of it all was an accidental discovery born from a desperate phone call, a product testing experiment that had revealed not just the durability of makeup and comfort of clothing, but the resilience of the human spirit and its capacity for authentic transformation. As Lucille got ready for bed, removing her makeup with the careful routine she'd perfected over the years, she smiled at the memory of that first reluctant yes to her aunt's request. She couldn't have known then where that simple agreement would lead, to a new name, a new understanding of herself, a new purpose in life. But that was the beauty of transformation, she reflected as she slipped into her nightgown. You never quite knew who you might become until you gave yourself permission to discover.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!